My girlfriend made me compete with her backup boyfriends. I thought I was meeting her family for dinner, but instead, I walked into a real-life arena where I was just another contestant fighting for survival. Hey everyone, before we get in the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Dylan, and I am 26 years old. The evening air was crisp, carrying the distinct chill of autumn that always seemed to signal a turning point in life, though I had no idea how drastic mine would be that night. I stood outside the restaurant, a high-end steakhouse downtown that I had saved up for 2 months to afford, checking my reflection in the darkened glass. My hair was perfectly styled, my shirt pressed to a crisp edge, and a small velvet box rested in my jacket pocket, burning a hole against my chest. I had been planning this night for weeks. Bianca and I had been together for 6 months, and while our relationship had its fair share of ups and downs, I felt in my gut that she was the one. She was magnetic, beautiful, and possessed a chaotic energy that made me feel alive even when it left me exhausted. Tonight, I thought, was the night I would ask her to make things official in the most permanent way possible. I thought I was meeting her parents, or perhaps her closest friends, to get their blessing before I dropped to one knee. I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the restaurant, the warmth of the interior washing over me along with the scent of sizzling garlic butter and expensive wine. The maitre d' greeted me with a practiced smile, and I gave him Bianca's name. He nodded, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite identify, maybe pity, maybe amusement, and led me through the crowded dining room toward a secluded, circular booth in the back corner. The lighting was dim, casting long, dramatic shadows across the table. As I approached, I saw Bianca first. She looked stunning, dressed in a crimson dress that hugged her figure, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. But my smile faltered when I saw who was sitting opposite her. It wasn't her parents. It wasn't a group of girlfriends. Sitting on the U-shaped leather booth were 3 men, all impeccably dressed, all nursing drinks, and all staring at me with a mixture of curiosity and predatory assessment. To Bianca's right sat a man who looked like he had just stepped off a corporate takeover brochure, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my car. To her left was a guy who had the rugged, beard-stubbled look of an action star, his arms crossed over a chest that strained against his shirt. In the middle was a younger guy, fresh-faced and eager, with the innocent smile of someone who had no idea what he was walking into. Bianca looked up as I arrived, her lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't stand to kiss me. She didn't reach out to take my hand. Instead, she patted the empty space next to her, sandwiching me between her and the corporate type. I slid into the booth, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my spine, despite the cool air conditioning. I opened my mouth to introduce myself, to ask what was going on, but the heavy atmosphere in the booth choked the words in my throat. The man to my right extended a hand, his grip firm and dominating. "You must be Dylan," he said, his voice smooth like polished marble. "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm Julian. This is Brock, and that's Kip." I shook their hands mechanically, my mind racing to construct a logical explanation for this gathering. Maybe it was a business dinner. Maybe they were cousins I didn't know about. But the way they looked at me, the way they looked at Bianca, was devoid of familial warmth. It was competitive. It was hungry. I looked at Bianca for answers, searching her face for the warmth I was used to, but I only found a cool, calculating detachment. She took a sip of her wine, swirling the red liquid slowly, her gaze fixed on me like a scientist observing a new specimen in a jar. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until Bianca finally set her glass down with a delicate clink that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet booth. The anticipation in the booth was palpable, a thick fog of tension that made it hard to breathe. I looked from one man to the next, trying to find a friendly face, but I was met with stone-cold indifference masked by polite smiles. Julian, the corporate shark, checked his watch, as if I were late for a meeting I didn't know I had scheduled. Brock, the rugged one, smirked into his whiskey, while Kip, the youngest, looked at me with wide, nervous eyes clearly just as confused as I was, but trying desperately to hide it. I felt a strange surge of protectiveness toward him, though I didn't know why. Bianca finally cleared her throat, commanding the attention of the table instantly. She didn't look embarrassed or apologetic for the strange setup. She looked powerful. "Thank you all for coming," Bianca said, her voice low and sultry, carrying easily over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "I know Dylan is probably a little confused right now, but don't worry, everything will become clear very soon." She turned her gaze directly onto me, her eyes dissecting my appearance. "Dylan, you probably thought tonight was just a romantic dinner. Maybe you thought you were meeting some friends. But tonight is actually a very important interview. You see, I've decided that we are entering a trial period." The words hung in the air, foreign and nonsensical. A trial period? For a relationship we were already in? I felt the velvet box in my pocket suddenly feel like a lead weight. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but the sheer absurdity of the situation paralyzed me. Bianca continued, her tone businesslike. "I believe in keeping my options open and ensuring that I am with the best possible partner for my future. I haven't been completely satisfied lately, so I decided to implement a little friendly competition." She gestured elegantly around the table. "You are all here because you have expressed interest in a serious commitment with me. Julian, Brock, Kip, and Dylan. You are the finalists." My stomach dropped through the floor of the restaurant. Finalists? There were other men? I was being interviewed for a job I thought I already had. Julian chuckled, a low, confident sound, and took a sip of his drink. He knew about this. He wasn't shocked. Brock just nodded, as if this were the most natural arrangement in the world. "The rules are simple," Bianca announced, picking up a menu. "Over the course of this dinner, we will discuss various topics: finance, romance, lifestyle, and future goals. I will be awarding points based on your answers, your demeanor, and how well you cater to my needs. The winner of tonight's round will secure the exclusive position of my primary boyfriend for the next month. The losers will be moved to the backup roster." She looked at me, a challenge in her eyes. "And since you're the current boyfriend, Dylan, you have the most to lose. You're the benchmark. If you don't impress me tonight more than them, you're out." I stared at her, my mouth agape, waiting for the punchline. It had to be a prank. A hidden camera show, but the look in Julian's eyes told me it was deadly serious. He wanted my spot. They all did. I felt a flush of humiliation creep up my neck. 6 months of intimacy, of sharing secrets and late-night talks, had been reduced to a scoreboard. I wasn't a partner. I was a temp worker fighting to keep a contract that was about to expire. Bianca snapped her fingers, signaling a waiter, and the dinner service began. The interview was starting. I sat back, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, hard anger that began to crystallize in my gut. I looked at the other men. They were ready to perform. They knew the lines to this script, and I was the only one holding a blank page. The waiter began pouring wine, and Bianca picked up her fork, her eyes gleaming with sadistic delight as the first question was hurled across the table like a grenade. The appetizers arrived, truffle fries and calamari arranged with artistic precision on long white plates, but nobody moved to eat. The air at the table was thick with competitive posturing, a silent war fought with glares and stiffened spines. Bianca leaned forward, resting her chin on her interlaced fingers, her gaze sweeping over us like a queen inspecting her troops. She started with Julian, her voice taking on a flirtatious lilt that twisted a knife in my gut. She asked him about his recent investment portfolio, her eyes lighting up as he described a complex offshore venture that yielded a 30% return. She nodded approvingly, hanging on his every word, visibly impressed by the numbers he rattled off. "That sounds very secure, Julian," Bianca cooed, scribbling something on a small notepad she had produced from her purse. "Security is crucial for a future family. 10 points for foresight." Julian smirked, shooting me a sidelong glance that screamed victory. I clenched my jaw, gripping the stem of my wine glass until my knuckles turned white. Then she turned to Brock. She asked about his physical fitness regimen, her eyes tracing the lines of his arms. Brock launched into a story about scaling a mountain in Patagonia with nothing but a compass and a water bottle. He spoke with a rugged confidence, painting a picture of a life of adventure and danger. Bianca laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in weeks, and awarded him points for vitality and strength. Finally, she turned to Kip, who looked like he might be sick. She asked him about his willingness to support her artistic endeavors, whatever that meant. Kip stammered, promising to pay for her painting classes and her gallery shows, offering up his future earnings with blind devotion. Bianca smiled, a predatory benevolence, and gave him points for potential and loyalty. Then, her eyes locked onto mine. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. She didn't ask about my job as a graphic designer, and she didn't ask about my hobbies. Instead, she went straight for the jugular. "Dylan," she said, her voice cool and detached. "Julian just discussed financial security, Brock discussed physical prowess, and Kip discussed unconditional support. In the last month, you have failed to plan a date that cost more than $50. You canceled our gym membership because it was too expensive, and you complained last week when I asked you to help me move a dresser." She tapped her pen against the paper. "Convince me why you shouldn't be at the bottom of the leaderboard right now." I felt the heat rise to my face, not from embarrassment, but from a sheer, unadulterated rage. I looked around the table. Julian was smirking. Brock was looking at me like I was prey. Kip was looking at Bianca with puppy dog eyes. I was in a circus, and I was the only one who didn't know I was supposed to be juggling. I took a breath, steadying myself. I spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. I told her that I canceled the gym membership because we were trying to save for a trip to Europe, a trip she had said she wanted more than anything. I told her that the $50 dates were because I was paying off her credit card bill from the month before, a bill she had run up shopping for clothes to impress other people. And I told her that I moved that dresser alone because she was busy on the phone with someone else. Silence followed my words. Bianca's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a crack in the porcelain mask. But then, she simply checked a box on her paper. "Defensive attitude," she announced to the table. -5 points for Dylan. The table erupted in low chuckles from Julian and Brock. I sat back, my appetite completely gone. I realized then that this wasn't about truth. It wasn't about love or partnership. It was a performance. I was expected to dance, and I refused to humiliate myself further for an audience that had already decided on the verdict. The main course arrived, steaks cooked to various degrees of perfection, placed before us like sacrificial offerings. The smell of seared meat usually made my mouth water, but tonight, the savory scent mingled with the stench of toxic narcissism to create a nauseating cocktail. Bianca continued her interrogation, pivoting from personal stats to compatibility scenarios. She presented hypothetical situations designed to pit us against one another, forcing us to tear each other down in an attempt to climb the ladder of her approval. Scenario 1, Bianca said, cutting into a rare filet mignon. "We are at a gala. My ex-boyfriend, who happens to be a world-renowned photographer, approaches us. He is rude and condescending to you. What do you do?" Julian jumped in first. He explained that he would use his connections to destroy the ex's reputation, leveraging his business network to ensure the man never worked in the city again. Bianca looked delighted, her eyes shining at the thought of such petty vengeance. She awarded him points for power and influence. Brock chimed in, claiming he would simply intimidate the man with his size, stepping into his personal space until he backed down. Points for protective instincts. Kip mumbled something about telling the man to leave her alone, earning a pitying pat on the hand for Bianca. Then they all looked at me. I knew the answer they wanted. They wanted aggression. They wanted a display of ownership. But that wasn't who I was, and frankly, Bianca knew that. She had once told me she loved me because I was a pacifist, because I didn't engage in chest-beating contests like the other guys she used to date. Now, she was using that very nature as a weapon against me. I swallowed a bite of dry potato and told her the truth. I said that if the ex was rude, I would simply ask Bianca if she wanted to leave. I said that another man's opinion didn't define our relationship, and that fighting him in the middle of a gala would only embarrass her and ruin the night we were supposed to be enjoying. I said that my priority was her comfort, not my ego. The reaction was immediate. Bianca's face curled into a sneer. "Passive," she declared, scribbling furiously on her notepad, unwilling to defend my honor. "Dylan, that is a distinct lack of alpha energy. 0 points." The other men snickered. Julian shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of disdain and pity. I looked at Bianca, really looked at her, and I didn't recognize the woman sitting across from me. This wasn't the girl I cuddled with on the couch watching bad horror movies. This was a stranger high on power, feeding off the validation of 3 desperate men. She was rewriting history, turning my patience into weakness and my thoughtfulness into cowardice. But it was when she started comparing us explicitly that the dynamic shifted. She began to list my flaws side by side with their perceived strengths. "Dylan, you have a steady job, but look at Julian. He has a career. You have a nice apartment, but Brock owns a penthouse. You're kind, but Kip is adoring." She was quantifying us, reducing human beings to a checklist of assets and liabilities. She was treating us like products on a shelf, comparing the labels and discarding the one with the damaged packaging. I watched the other men as she praised them. I saw the hunger in their eyes. They didn't love her. They loved winning. They loved being told they were better than someone else. They were trapped in the same game, willing to debase themselves for a gold star from a woman who didn't respect any of us. As the meal progressed, I stopped listening. I watched the way Julian leaned in too close, the way Brock flexed his hand when he reached for his drink, the way Kip nodded at everything she said like a bobblehead. We were all trapped in her web, but I was the only one who realized the spider was eventually going to eat us all. The backup boyfriends didn't understand that being the winner just meant you were the next victim. I reached into my pocket and fingered the velvet box, the irony nearly crushing me. I was going to ask this woman to marry me. I was going to legally bind myself to this chaos. The thought made me want to laugh out loud, a hysterical, sharp sound that I barely managed to suppress. As the plates were cleared away and the dessert menu was circulated, the atmosphere shifted from competitive to openly hostile. The trial period was coming to an end, and the testosterone at the table was spiking. Julian and Brock were engaging in subtle verbal jabs, questioning each other's credentials while Bianca looked on, fanning the flames. She seemed to thrive on the conflict, her eyes darting back and forth between them like she was watching a tennis match. I sat in silence, a ghost at my own funeral, planning my exit strategy. I knew I wasn't winning this game. I didn't want to win. The prize was a lifetime of walking on eggshells, constantly auditioning for the role of husband. Then, Bianca set the stage for the final round. The check sat in the center of the table, a small, folded rectangle of white paper that represented the climax of the evening. She rested her hand on it, her fingers tapping rhythmically. "Gentlemen," she purred, "the final challenge is a classic one. It demonstrates generosity, financial status, and perhaps most importantly, who values this evening the most." She looked at each of us in turn. "The bill is yours to fight over. Whoever secures the check gets a massive bonus in the final tally. And let's be honest, in this economy, money talks." It was a cheap tactic, a transparent way to see who would bleed the most cash for a chance to sit by her side. Immediately, Julian reached for his wallet, a thick black leather brick bursting with black cards. Brock lunged forward, throwing a massive wad of cash onto the table, his movements aggressive and dominant. Kip looked at his wallet with panic, realizing he was outgunned. The physical posturing was ridiculous, grown men grappling over the right to pay for a woman who was sitting there enjoying every second of it. I watched Bianca watch them. Her smile was wide, her eyes gleaming with greed. She wasn't looking for a partner. She was looking for a benefactor. I looked at the bill. It was astronomical. The wine alone was $300 a bottle. I could pay it. I had the money in my savings, the money I had been saving for a ring. But as I looked at Bianca, expecting me to whip out my credit card and join the fray, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap, but a quiet, definitive one. It was the sound of my self-respect returning. I saw the future she was offering, a life of transactional interactions, of buying her affection, of competing with invisible ghosts until I was drained dry and discarded for the next model. I didn't reach for my wallet. I didn't reach for the bill. I sat back, picked up my water glass, and took a long, slow drink. The silence at the table was sudden and jarring. Julian and Brock froze, their hands hovering over the check. Kip stopped fidgeting. Bianca's smile vanished, replaced by a look of confused irritation. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Dylan," she snapped. "What are you doing?" "The challenge is issued." I set the glass down. The cool liquid had cleared my head. I looked her dead in the eye, and for the first time in 6 months, I didn't see a goddess. I saw a sad, lonely woman who had to turn her love life into a game show because she didn't know how to actually connect with another human being. I saw the other men, desperate and pathetic in their need for her validation. And I saw myself, the fool who had almost signed his life away to this circus. "I'm not playing," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. Bianca let out a disbelieving laugh, but it was hollow. "What do you mean you're not playing? You're losing if you don't play." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said softly. "I'm winning because I'm leaving." I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The entire restaurant seemed to go quiet, though it was likely just my hyper-focused perception. Bianca stood up as well, her face flushing a deep crimson. The control was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't like it one bit. The power dynamic at the table had shattered instantly. By standing up, I had broken the unspoken rule that we were all just props in Bianca's play. I was no longer a contestant. I was a human being exercising free will, and that was the one thing her system couldn't account for. Bianca's eyes darted around the restaurant, noticing that nearby tables were staring. She was humiliated, her public spectacle turning into a public rejection. She tried to regain control, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that betrayed her composure. "Sit down, Dylan," she hissed, leaning over the table and forgetting her poised elegance. "You are embarrassing yourself. Do you really want to walk away from this? From us? For what? Your pride." She gestured vaguely at Julian and Brock, who were watching the scene with confused smirks, clearly thinking I was cracking under pressure. "Look at them," she spat. "They're willing to fight for me. You're just walking away. You're weak." The insult hung in the air, but it didn't land. It felt like a sparkler that had fizzled out in the rain. I felt a profound sense of pity for her. She equated toxicity with passion and conflict with commitment. I looked at the other men one last time. "Good luck, guys," I said, and I meant it. They were going to need it. Julian scowled, realizing that my exit ruined his victory. How could he win if the main competition didn't care? Brock just looked bored now that the physical fight over the check was off. And Kip looked at me with a hint of envy. He saw the open door I was walking through, but he was too terrified of being alone to follow. I turned back to Bianca. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the velvet box. I placed it gently on the table, right next to the untouched check. "I wasn't coming here to compete," I told her, my voice calm, projecting just enough for the interested eavesdroppers to hear. "I was coming here to ask you to marry me." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian dropped his fork. Bianca's mouth fell open, the color draining from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. She stared at the small box, then up at me, her eyes wide with shock. The game had collapsed under the weight of what she had almost thrown away. The backup boyfriend suddenly looked very small, very ridiculous, and very unnecessary. I had the ultimate card, and I hadn't even played it. I was folding before the showdown because the pot wasn't worth the gamble. But I continued, watching her process the information. "I'm not going to ask that question now. And I'm not going to ask it tomorrow. Because tonight, this is who you are, and I deserve better than a jury verdict on whether I'm good enough to love you." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back when I heard her chair scrape violently against the floor. I didn't stop when she called my name, abandoning the seductive, cool persona for a desperate, cracking scream. I didn't flinch when she started bargaining, offering to cancel the competition, offering to make me the winner by default. The magic trick was over. The curtain had fallen, and I had seen the strings. I walked through the dining room, the clinking of silverware and murmuring conversations washing over me. The maitre d' opened the heavy oak door for me, the cool night air hitting my face like a cleansing wave. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city lights blurring for a moment as the adrenaline of the confrontation wore off. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't smell like manipulation and expensive steak. I was alone. I was single. And for the first time in a long time, I was entirely free. I felt lighter, as if I had been carrying a backpack full of rocks for 6 months and had just dropped it. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, my hand steady. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and radio music, but my mind was crystal clear. I expected to feel heartbreak, to feel the tearing pain of a severed relationship, but it wasn't there. Instead, there was a sense of relief, like recovering from a long flu I hadn't realized I had. When I walked into my apartment, it was quiet. The shadows didn't feel lonely. They felt peaceful. I went into the bedroom and gathered the things she had left there: a toothbrush, a hoodie, a few magazines. I put them all in a box without a second thought. There were no tears, no lingering scent of perfume on the pillow that made me want to call her. It was just stuff. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. The notifications lit up the dark room like a strobe light. First came the text from Bianca. They started angry, accusing me of being a coward and a loser. Then they shifted to confusion, asking how I could throw away 6 months over a little game. Then came the bargaining. She promised she would never do it again. She said she didn't mean it, that it was just a test to see if I would fight for her. She claimed the other guys meant nothing. Finally, the texts turned desperate, pleading with me to come back, saying she had made a mistake. I read them all, one by one, feeling nothing but a dull ache for the woman she used to be, or perhaps the woman I thought she was. Then, a notification popped up from an unknown number. It was a group chat. Bianca's backup boyfriends. I laughed out loud in the empty apartment. Julian, Brock, and Kip had been added to a group. I was in it too, presumably added by Bianca to further humiliate me. The messages were flying. Julian was furious that I had left, claiming I had ruined the vibe. Brock was aggressive, demanding to know where the ring went. Kip was asking if the competition was still on. Bianca was trying to manage them, telling them to ignore me, that I was out of the game. I took a screenshot of the chat. A perfect piece of evidence of the insanity. I had escaped, and then I blocked the number and deleted the thread. A week passed. The silence in my life was golden. I threw myself back into my work, my hobbies, and my friendships, things I had neglected while trying to navigate Bianca's emotional minefield. I heard through the grapevine, mutual friends who didn't know the full story, that Bianca was auditioning again. Someone mentioned seeing her at a different restaurant with 3 new guys. I wasn't surprised. The game was too addictive for her to quit. She needed that validation, that feeling of being the prize in a contest she rigged. 2 months later, I was at a coffee shop when I ran into Kip. He looked tired, his eyes sunken, his posture defeated. He saw me and hesitated, then walked over. He looked sheepish. He told me he had won the dinner that night, securing the spot of primary boyfriend after I left. He told me it had been a nightmare of constant scrutiny, of walking on eggshells, and of meeting new challengers every Friday night. He told me he had finally broken up with her the night before after finding a list of potential replacements on her phone. We sat and talked for an hour, laughing at the absurdity of it, 2 survivors of a shipwreck we didn't see coming. As I left the coffee shop, the sun was shining, reflecting off the windows of the buildings downtown. I felt a surge of gratitude for that disastrous dinner. If she hadn't pulled that stunt, if she hadn't tried to turn my heart into a scoreboard, I might have been trapped in that cycle for years. I might have married her. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I hailed a cab, heading to meet a friend for dinner. Just a friend, no games, no scores, and no competition. I got into the cab and smiled at the driver. I was 26, I was single, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I was worth. And nobody else got to set the price.